At 4 in the morning, Elena Whitmore made the decision that would shatter everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the lie she'd been living for 18 months. Her husband, the man who vowed to cherish her, whispered another woman's name in his sleep, not once, 3 times. And in that cold, suffocating silence, something inside her didn't break. It detonated. What happened next wasn't a breakdown, it was a reckoning. If you've ever loved someone who couldn't see you, stay with me until the end. Hit like and drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. The clock on the mantel read 4:17 a.m. Elena knew because she'd been staring at it for the past 11 minutes, watching the second hand drag itself around the face like it was wading through mud. The bedroom was tomb quiet, except for Adrian's breathing, deep, even, the kind of sleep that only came to people with clear consciences. She envied that, hated it even. The sheets were expensive. Egyptian cotton, 1,200 thread count, ordered from some boutique in London that didn't even list prices on their website. They felt like silk against her skin, and she despised them. Everything in this room was like that, beautiful, cold, suffocating in its perfection. Adrian shifted beside her. Elena went still. His arm moved across the empty space between them, not reaching for her, just repositioning, and his lips parted. Vivienne. It came out soft, tender. The kind of whisper you'd use for someone you actually cared about. Elena's breath caught in her chest. She waited. Maybe she'd misheard. Maybe it was just sleep talk, meaningless syllables strung together by a dreaming mind. Vivienne, don't go. Her heart didn't break. It went numb. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the mattress too much. Adrian didn't stir. Of course he didn't. He'd probably sleep through an earthquake if it meant he didn't have to face anything uncomfortable. The third time he said it, Elena was already on her feet. I'll wait for you, Vivienne. That one hit differently. It wasn't just a name. It was a promise. One he'd apparently made to someone who wasn't his wife. Elena stood in the darkness, barefoot on the plush carpet, and felt the last fragile thread of hope she'd been clinging to snap clean in half. She didn't cry. Crying required surprise, and she wasn't surprised. Not really. The signs had been there for months. His late nights at the club, the way he barely looked at her during dinner, the mechanical quality of their conversations. Like he was reading lines from a script he hadn't bothered to memorize. But hearing it, hearing her name in his mouth, shaped with more affection than he'd shown Elena in half a year, that was different. Elena moved to the wardrobe and opened it as quietly as she could. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She'd expected them to shake, expected some kind of physical manifestation of the chaos tearing through her chest. But no. Her fingers were calm as she pulled out a simple traveling dress, navy wool, practical, nothing like the ornate gowns Adrian's mother insisted she wear to every social function. She dressed in the dark, stockings, boots, a warm shawl because November mornings were brutal in the countryside, and she wasn't about to freeze to death for the sake of pride. Her wedding ring caught the faint moonlight filtering through the curtains. Elena stared at it for a long moment. White gold, engraved with their initials, and the date they'd been married. January 14th. A winter wedding because Adrian's mother thought it would photograph better. She twisted it off her finger and set it on the bedside table. It made a tiny sound against the wood, barely a click, but in the silence of the room, it felt like a gunshot. Adrian didn't wake. Of course he didn't. Elena picked up the leather traveling bag she'd brought with her when she first arrived at Ashford Hall, back when she'd been naive enough to think this marriage might actually work. She packed quickly. A few changes of clothes, her mother's cameo brooch, the small notebook where she kept her personal accounts, and the letters from her father that she'd hidden at the bottom of her vanity drawer. Everything else could stay. The jewelry Adrian had given her, the dresses his mother had commissioned, the books he'd bought without asking if she even liked poetry. None of it was really hers anyway. It had all been part of the costume, the performance of being Lady Hale. She was done performing. The hallway outside their bedroom was dark and cold. The servants wouldn't be up for another hour, which meant Elena had a narrow window to leave without causing a scene. She moved quickly, her boots soundless on the runner carpet, the traveling bag light in her hand. She almost made it to the stairs. Leaving, are we? Elena froze. The voice came from the sitting room to her left, clipped, aristocratic, laced with the kind of disdain that only came from decades of practice. Lady Constance Hale, Adrian's mother. Elena turned slowly. The older woman was seated in a high-backed chair near the window, a book open in her lap, but her eyes fixed squarely on Elena. She was dressed, despite the hour, in a deep burgundy morning gown with her silver hair pinned back in an immaculate chignon. She looked like she'd been waiting. "I wasn't aware I needed permission," Elena said quietly. "You don't." Constance closed the book with a soft snap. "But I do think it's interesting that you're sneaking out like a thief in the night rather than addressing the matter like an adult." Elena's jaw tightened. "I didn't think Adrian would notice." "He won't." Constance's smile was thin and sharp. "He never does." The admission should have shocked her. Instead, it just felt like confirmation. "Then why are you here?" Elena asked. Constance stood, smoothing the front of her gown with practiced hands. "Because I wanted to be certain you understood something before you left." "And what's that?" "That this—" Constance gestured vaguely around the room, as if encompassing the entire estate, the marriage, the life Elena had tried to build here, was never going to work. Not because of you, though I'm sure you'll blame yourself, but because my son is weak. Elena blinked. Of all the things she'd expected Lady Hale to say, that wasn't one of them. "He married you because you were quiet," Constance continued, her tone matter-of-fact, clinical. "Because you didn't challenge him. Because you seemed content to fade into the background and let him pretend to be the master of this estate while you did all the actual work." Don't insult me by pretending otherwise." Constance's eyes were cold and sharp. "I've lived here for 40 years. I know who manages the tenant disputes, who reviews the contracts, who keeps the steward from embezzling us into bankruptcy. It certainly isn't Adrian." Elena's throat felt tight. "If you knew, why didn't you say something? To whom? My son, who can't be bothered to notice his own wife? The steward, who would have resented the interference? You?" Constance tilted her head. "You never asked for help, Elena. You just endured." The word landed like a slap. "I tried," Elena said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "I tried to talk to him, to make him see—" "See what? That he married a woman with a mind of her own? That his perfect gentle wife was actually running his estate while he played cards and drank brandy with his friends?" Constance's laugh was bitter. "Men like Adrian don't want to see that, my dear. It would require them to acknowledge their own inadequacy." Elena's hands tightened around the handle of her bag. "Then why tell me this now? Because you're leaving, and I wanted you to know that you weren't wrong to do so." Constance stepped closer, her expression unreadable. "I stayed. I spent 43 years in a marriage to a man who saw me as decorative furniture. I convinced myself it was duty, or love, or some noble sacrifice. It wasn't. It was cowardice." Elena stared at her. "Don't make my mistake," Constance said quietly. "Don't convince yourself that suffering in silence is strength. It's not. It's just slow erasure." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Constance reached out and placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, the first time she'd ever touched her with anything resembling warmth. "Go," she said, "before you forget who you were." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She turned and walked down the stairs, through the grand foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, past the portraits of dead Hales who stared down at her with frozen disapproval. The front door was heavy. She had to put her shoulder into it to get it open. The cold November air hit her like a wall, sharp and clean and real. Behind her, Ashford Hall stood silent and imposing, all stone and shadow and secrets. Elena didn't look back. The walk to the stables took 10 minutes. Her father's estate was only 6 miles away, close enough that she could make it on horseback before the sun came up. The stable boy, a kid named Tommy, who couldn't have been more than 15, was mucking out one of the stalls when she arrived. He jumped when he saw her, nearly dropping his pitchfork. "Lady Hale, I didn't expect—" "I need Tempest saddled," Elena said, cutting him off. "Now, please." Tommy blinked at her, taking in the traveling bag, the lack of a chaperone, the early hour. To his credit, he didn't ask questions. "Yes, ma'am, right away." Tempest was a gray mare, 15 hands high, with a temperament that matched her name. Adrian had bought her for Elena as a wedding gift, one of the few things he'd chosen himself. She was fast, stubborn, and utterly unsuited for the kind of delicate riding ladies were supposed to do. Elena loved her. Tommy brought the mare out already saddled, and Elena took the reins with a nod of thanks. You need an escort, ma'am? Tommy asked hesitantly. No. It's dark, and the roads. I'll be fine, Tommy. Thank you. She swung up into the saddle, easier in a traveling dress than in the ridiculous side saddle getup she usually wore, and adjusted her seat. Tommy stepped back, still looking uncertain. Should I tell his lordship where you've gone? Elena looked down at him. Tell him whatever you like. I don't think he'll ask. Before Tommy could respond, she nudged Tempest into a trot and headed for the gate. The road to her father's estate was narrow and poorly maintained, flanked on both sides by dense woods that seemed to swallow the moonlight. Most women wouldn't have risked it alone, especially not in the dark. Elena didn't care. She pushed Tempest into a canter, letting the cold air sting her face, letting the rhythm of the horse's hooves drown out the thoughts trying to claw their way to the surface. Vivienne. The name kept circling back, a vulture picking at a carcass. She didn't even know who Vivienne was. A mistress, probably. Some widow or actress Adrian had met in the city, someone charming and beautiful and utterly unburdened by the expectation of being a proper wife. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the tenderness. He'd said her name like it mattered, like she mattered. He'd never said Elena's name like that. Not once. Not even on their wedding night, when he'd kissed her with all the passion of a man signing a contract, efficient and uninspired. Elena pushed Tempest faster. The woods blurred past, dark and impenetrable, and for a moment she let herself imagine just riding straight through them, disappearing into the trees and never coming back. No estate, no marriage, no suffocating expectations, just her and the horse and the night. But reality didn't work like that. She had responsibilities. Tenants who depended on her, accounts that wouldn't balance themselves, a father who'd sacrificed his own comfort to give her the education most women were denied. She couldn't just vanish. So she rode toward the one place she knew she'd be safe. Whitmore House appeared through the trees just as the first fingers of dawn started to creep across the horizon. It was smaller than Ashford Hall, rougher around the edges, with ivy climbing the stone walls, and a garden that had gone slightly wild without her mother there to tend it. Elena had never been so relieved to see anything in her life. She dismounted in the courtyard and led Tempest to the small stable behind the house. Her father's old gelding, Brutus, nickered softly in greeting. "Shh," Elena murmured, stroking Tempest's neck. "You're home now. We both are." She unsaddled the mare, rubbed her down with hands that finally started to shake, and filled the trough with fresh water. By the time she finished, the sky had shifted from black to deep blue, and lights were flickering on inside the house. Elena picked up her bag and walked to the back door. It opened before she could knock. Her father stood in the doorway, wearing a rumpled dressing gown and an expression that cycled rapidly from confusion to concern to something that looked suspiciously like relief. "Elena." It was the first time anyone had said her name like it mattered in months. She dropped the bag and stepped forward, and her father caught her in a hug that smelled like pipe tobacco and old books and safety. "I left him," she said into his shoulder, and finally, her voice cracked. "I know," her father said quietly. "I've been waiting for you to." They didn't talk about it immediately. Her father, James Whitmore, retired military officer turned gentleman farmer, had never been one for emotional conversations. Instead, he made her tea, heaped sugar into it the way she liked, and sat across from her at the scarred kitchen table while she wrapped her hands around the mug and tried to stop shaking. "You look exhausted," he said finally. "I haven't slept." "When did you eat last?" Elena had to think about it. "Dinner, yesterday." James stood and moved to the stove without a word. Within minutes, the smell of frying eggs and toast filled the kitchen, warm and ordinary and grounding. Elena watched him cook and felt something unknot in her chest. This was real. Not the cold perfection of Ashford Hall, not the stiff dinners where every word was weighed and measured, not the suffocating silence of a marriage that had never really existed. Just her father, making breakfast, treating her like a person instead of a problem. When he set the plate in front of her, she ate mechanically, not tasting anything, just needing the fuel. James sat back down and watched her with the quiet patience of a man who'd raised a daughter alone after his wife died, who'd taught her to ride and shoot and think for herself even when society told him he shouldn't. "Do you want to tell me what happened?" he asked. Elena set down her fork. He said her name, in his sleep, 3 times. James's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Her name. Vivian. Elena stared at her plate. "I don't even know who she is. Someone else. Someone he actually cares about. And you left." "I left." James nodded slowly. "Good." Elena looked up, startled. "I'm not going to tell you to go back," her father said quietly. "I'm not going to tell you that marriage is sacred or that you need to try harder or any of the nonsense they'll throw at you when word gets out. You're my daughter. You're brilliant and capable, and you deserve better than a man who can't see what's right in front of him." Elena's throat burned. "Everyone's going to say I failed." "Let them. His mother can go to hell along with the rest of them." James reached across the table and gripped her hand. "You didn't fail, Elena. You survived. And now you're going to do more than that." "What do you mean?" A slow smile spread across his face. "You're going to remind them who you were before you became Lady Hale. And trust me, they're not going to like it." For the first time in months, Elena felt something other than numbness. She felt dangerous. Elena woke to sunlight slicing through curtains she'd forgotten weren't heavy velvet. For a moment, one disorienting, panicked moment, she thought she was still at Ashford Hall, still trapped in that suffocating bedroom with its perfect linens and cold silence. Then she heard the sound of her father's boots on the stairs, the creak of old floorboards that had never been replaced, and reality settled back into place. She was home. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from the ride and from 18 months of holding herself too carefully, too quietly. The room looked exactly as she'd left it. Same faded wallpaper with its pattern of tiny roses, same bookshelf crammed with novels her governess had forbidden, same window overlooking the fields where she used to ride every morning before anyone told her ladies weren't supposed to ride like that. Her wedding dress hung in the corner, still in its garment bag. Elena stared at it for a long moment, then got out of bed and shoved it to the back of the wardrobe where she wouldn't have to look at it. Downstairs, she found her father in the study, bent over a stack of correspondence that looked like it had been accumulating for weeks. He glanced up when she entered, taking in her rumpled nightgown and the fact that her hair was loose around her shoulders, something Lady Constance would have called scandalous. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Better than I have in months." Elena crossed to the window and looked out at the fields. "What's all this?" James gestured at the papers with obvious frustration. "Estate business, tenant complaints, contract disputes, bills I can't make sense of because whoever wrote them used more legal jargon than actual English." Elena felt something flicker in her chest. Recognition, maybe, or muscle memory. "Can I look?" Her father raised an eyebrow. "You want to read boring legal documents the morning after you left your husband? I want to do something useful." She pulled up a chair without waiting for permission. "Besides, I've been managing Ashford's books for over a year. This can't be worse than that disaster." James handed her the first document, watching her face carefully. "You never mentioned you were handling Adrian's estate. He never asked me to. I just started doing it when I realized no one else was." Elena scanned the contract, something about timber rights and boundary disputes. "His steward is either incompetent or embezzling, possibly both. And Adrian? Didn't notice." She made a note in the margin with her father's pen. "Or didn't care. Hard to tell the difference." They worked in silence for a while, Elena sorting through the chaos of her father's paperwork with the same methodical efficiency she'd brought to Ashford Hall. It felt good, normal, like using a part of her brain that had been shut down for too long. "This one's a problem," she said finally, holding up a lease agreement. "Your tenant, Miller, is it? He's being charged twice the going rate for pasture land, and the contract auto-renews every year with a built-in increase." James frowned. "That can't be legal." "It's legal, just predatory." Elena flipped to the signature page. "Who negotiated this?" "Some lawyer from town. Came highly recommended. By whom? Her father paused. Lord Ashford, actually, back before he died. Elena went very still. Adrian's father recommended your lawyer. Yes, why? She set the document down carefully. Because I've seen this exact contract structure before. At Ashford Hall. Same clauses, same fee schedule, same auto-renewal terms. Someone's running the same scheme on multiple estates. You think it's intentional? I think someone is very good at looking helpful while quietly bleeding landowners dry. Elena stood and started pacing, her mind already racing ahead. We need to find out who else is using this lawyer. If it's a pattern, we can break the contracts on grounds of fraud. James watched her with something that might have been pride. You know, you're terrifying when you get like this. Like what? Like yourself. Elena stopped pacing and looked at him. Her father was smiling, not the polite, strained smile she'd gotten used to at Ashford Hall, but genuine warmth. I forgot what that looked like, she admitted quietly. So did I. James stood and gripped her shoulder. Don't forget again. The next morning, Elena was up before dawn. She dressed in her oldest riding clothes, leather breeches that Lady Constance would have burned on sight, a worn linen shirt, boots that had actually seen use, and headed for the stables. Tempest nickered when she approached, already sensing the shift in energy. Ready to actually run? Elena murmured, stroking the mare's nose. She saddled Tempest herself, muscle memory taking over, hands quick and certain on the buckles. When she swung up into the saddle, something in her chest cracked open. Not breaking, but expanding, like a fist unclenching after holding tight for too long. The fields beyond Whitmore House stretched out in rolling waves of brown and gold, wild and unkempt, in a way Adrian's carefully manicured lawns never were. Elena nudged Tempest into a trot, then a canter, then, because there was no one here to tell her it wasn't ladylike, a full gallop. The wind tore at her hair, pulling it loose from its pins. The cold air burned her lungs. Tempest's hooves thundered against the frozen ground, powerful and sure. Elena laughed. It burst out of her unbidden, wild and slightly unhinged, and she didn't try to stop it. She leaned forward over Tempest's neck and let the horse run. Let herself feel the raw physicality of movement and speed and freedom. No one was watching. No one was judging. No one cared if she rode too fast or too hard or too much, like the girl she used to be before marriage taught her to be smaller. They crested a hill, and Elena pulled Tempest to a halt, both of them breathing hard, steam rising from the mare's flanks in the cold morning air. Below, she could see Whitmore House, small and imperfect and real. Beyond it, if she squinted, she could just make out the edge of Ashford lands, vast and imposing and utterly lifeless. She'd spent 18 months trying to belong there, 18 months shrinking herself down to fit into a space that was never meant for her. Never again, she said aloud. Tempest's ears flicked back, listening. Elena turned the mare away from Ashford Hall and rode back toward home. By the time she returned to the house, her father had visitors. Elena could hear voices from the study as she came in through the kitchen, still flushed from the ride, her hair a disaster and her clothes dusty. She started to head upstairs to change, old habits dying hard, then stopped herself. No, she wasn't Lady Hale here. She didn't need to perform. She walked straight to the study and pushed open the door. 3 men looked up in surprise. Her father, a tenant farmer she vaguely recognized, and a stranger in an expensive coat who was clearly trying not to stare at her disheveled appearance. Elena, James said mildly, we have company. I can see that. She crossed to the desk and leaned against it, deliberately casual. What's the problem? The stranger cleared his throat. I'm not sure this is appropriate. Mr. Carlyle here is from Ashford Hall, her father interrupted smoothly. Adrian's estate manager. He's asking about some missing documents. Elena's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. What kind of documents? Carlyle, middle-aged, balding, with the soft hands of a man who'd never done real work, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Certain financial records that Lady Hale may have removed when she left. You mean the record showing that you've been skimming from the estate accounts for the past 3 years? The room went dead silent. Carlyle's face turned an interesting shade of purple. I don't know what you're... The tenant payment ledgers don't match the deposit records, Elena said calmly. There's a consistent discrepancy of about 12%. At first I thought it was just incompetence, but the numbers are too consistent for that. Someone's redirecting funds. The tenant farmer, Miller, she remembered now, was grinning openly. Carlyle stood abruptly. This is absurd. I came here as a courtesy to inform Mr. Whitmore that Lord Hale expects those documents returned immediately, and instead I'm subjected to wild accusations. Did you bring the current ledgers with you? Elena asked. What? No, of course not. Then how do you know what's missing? She tilted her head. Unless you already knew exactly which documents I took, because you knew exactly what they'd reveal. Carlyle's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. Then he grabbed his hat and headed for the door. Lord Hale will hear about this. I'm sure he will, Elena called after him. Tell him I kept copies. The door slammed. Miller let out a low whistle. That was something. That was stupid, James said, but he didn't sound angry. You just made a powerful enemy. I made an enemy the moment I left. Elena straightened and brushed dust off her breeches. Might as well make it worth it. You really have proof? Miller asked. Elena looked at him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, with work-roughened hands and the kind of tan that came from actual labor. His eyes were sharp, watching her with open curiosity rather than the veiled disapproval she'd gotten used to at Ashford. I have 3 years of ledgers, she said, cross-referenced with deposit records, tenant payment schedules, and expense reports. The pattern is clear once you know what to look for. And you just knew? I managed my father's estate before I married, and I've been managing Ashford's books for over a year. She shrugged. Numbers don't lie, people do. Miller grinned. You should meet with the other tenants. Half of us have complaints about Carlyle's management, but Lord Hale won't hear it. Why not? Because Carlyle tells him what he wants to hear, that everything's running smoothly, that the tenants are happy, that there's no need for his lordship to actually visit his own lands. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. How long has it been since Adrian visited the estate? Miller and her father exchanged a glance. Not since the wedding, James said quietly. 18 months. Adrian hadn't set foot on his own lands in 18 months, while she'd been managing tenant disputes, renegotiating supplier contracts, and keeping the whole operation from collapsing. He'd been in London, playing cards, drinking with his friends, whispering Vivian's name in his sleep. I want to meet with them, Elena said abruptly. Miller blinked. Who? The tenants. All of them. Anyone who has a complaint about Ashford's management. She looked at her father. Can we host them here? Elena, James started. Adrian won't listen to them because Carlyle controls the information. But if I can document everything, the embezzlement, the mismanagement, the negligence, we can force his hand. Or you could let it burn, her father pointed out. It's not your problem anymore. Elena thought about that, about walking away completely, letting Ashford Hall crumble under the weight of its own corruption while she rebuilt her life here. It was tempting. But then she thought about Miller and the other tenants, about families who depended on that land, about people who'd done nothing wrong except trust that their landlord would honor his obligations. It's not about Adrian, she said finally. It's about them. Miller was watching her with something like hope. When? Tomorrow night. Spread the word. After Miller left, James poured himself a drink and offered one to Elena. She took it, even though it was barely past noon. You know what you're doing, right? Her father asked. Absolutely not. He laughed. Good. I was worried you'd gotten cautious. Elena sipped the whiskey and felt it burn all the way down. What if Adrian comes here? Do you think he will? Honestly? No. Adrian would send someone, Carlyle or his lawyer or his mother, but he wouldn't come himself. That would require caring enough to be inconvenienced. No, she said. I don't. Then stop worrying about him. James clinked his glass against hers. For the first time in 18 months, you're not his problem. Don't make him yours. The next evening, Whitmore House was packed. Elena had expected maybe a dozen tenants. Instead, nearly 30 people crowded into the dining room, overflowing into the hallway and parlor. Men and women both, some with children, all of them looking at her with a mixture of hope and suspicion. She stood at the head of the table, still in her riding clothes because she'd been helping her father set up chairs until the last minute, and felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. "Thank you for coming," she started, then stopped because her voice came out too quiet, too much like the woman she'd been at Ashford Hall. She cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "I know most of you don't know me. I'm James Whitmore's daughter. Until last week, I was married to Lord Adrian Hale." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "I'm not anymore," Elena continued, "and before anyone asks, no, I'm not here to spy for him or manipulate you or serve his interests. I'm here because I spent 18 months managing Ashford's estate, and I know exactly how badly it's being run." "Why should we trust you?" someone called from the back. "Fair question." "You shouldn't," Elena said bluntly. "Not yet, but I have documents that prove your rents have been inflated, your payment schedules altered, and your complaints systematically ignored. I can show you where the money's actually going, and if you're willing to work with me, we can use that information to force changes." She pulled out the first ledger and opened it on the table. "This is from 2 years ago. Anyone who paid rent in March 1844, come look at your entry." Several people pushed forward. Elena watched their faces change as they compared what they remembered paying to what was actually recorded and what was actually deposited. "That's not right," a woman said, pointing at a figure. "We paid £16, not 20. "I know," Elena said. "But Carlyle recorded 20 and pocketed the difference." "That bastard." "Wait," Elena held up a hand. "If we go after him without proof, it's our word against his. And Adrian will believe his estate manager over a group of tenants and his estranged wife." "So what do we do?" Miller asked. Elena took a breath. This was it. The moment she either committed fully or backed down. "We document everything," she said. "Every discrepancy, every falsified record, every complaint that was ignored. We build a case so airtight that Adrian can't dismiss it. And then what?" someone demanded. "He's still the landlord. He can do what he wants." "Not if the local magistrate gets involved." Elena met their eyes steadily. "Embezzlement is a crime. If we can prove Carlyle's been stealing, Adrian will have to act or risk prosecution himself for knowingly employing a thief." The room erupted into arguments, some people insisting it would work, others certain it would just make things worse, everyone talking over each other in a chaos of voices. Elena let them argue. These were people who'd been silenced for years, told their concerns didn't matter, that they should be grateful for what they had. They needed to be heard now, even if it was just by each other. Finally, Miller raised his voice above the din. "I say we do it. What have we got to lose? Our leases," someone shot back. "Our homes. Our livelihoods. We're losing those anyway," Miller argued. "Carlyle's been raising rents every year. Half of us can barely afford next quarter's payment. At least this way, we fight back." Slowly, reluctantly, the room quieted. One by one, people started nodding. Elena felt her heart hammering. This won't be easy, and it won't be fast. We'll need to gather statements, cross-reference records, probably deal with Carlyle trying to intimidate anyone who speaks up. "Are you sure?" "Are you?" Miller asked pointedly. Elena thought about Adrian, about the life she'd left behind, about the fact that she was essentially declaring war on her own husband's estate. Then she thought about the woman who'd ridden out this morning, wild and free and unapologetic. "Yes," she said. "I'm sure." They worked until past midnight. Elena set up a system, statements organized by date and issue, ledger entries cross-referenced with actual payments, a timeline of Carlyle's management decisions that showed a clear pattern of escalating abuse. Her father kept the whiskey flowing and the fire burning while people cycled through, giving their accounts, checking the records, asking questions. By the time the last tenant left, Elena's hand was cramping from writing and her eyes burned from reading by candlelight. "You should rest," James said, collecting empty glasses. "I'm fine." "You're exhausted." He set a glass in front of her. "Water this time, not whiskey." "This isn't a sprint, Elena. Pace yourself." She wanted to argue, but he was right. She'd been running on adrenaline and anger for days now, and eventually that would run out. "Did you see their faces?" she asked instead. "I did. They actually believe this might work." "Do you?" Elena stared at the piles of documents covering the table. It was a mountain of evidence, yes. But evidence only mattered if someone with power chose to act on it. And Adrian had spent 18 months not noticing that his wife was running his estate. He'd whispered another woman's name in his sleep and never once considered that Elena might hear it. He'd let his mother treat her like decorative furniture and his steward rob him blind and his lands fall into disrepair, all because paying attention would have required effort. Would he suddenly care now? I don't know, Elena admitted. But I know I can't just do nothing. James squeezed her shoulder. Then that's enough. 3 days later, Adrian finally sent a letter. It arrived by courier, expensive paper, heavy wax seal, her name written in his precise, careful handwriting that somehow managed to look impersonal even in script. Elena stared at it for a long time before opening it. Elena, I trust this letter finds you well. She laughed. Couldn't help it. The sheer absurdity of that opening line, as if she'd gone on holiday rather than fled in the middle of the night. I have been informed of certain events that occurred during Mr. Carlyle's recent visit to Whitmore House. While I appreciate your historical interest in estate management, I must ask that you refrain from interfering in Ashford business going forward. The documents you removed are property of the estate and must be returned immediately. Additionally, I would like to discuss the matter of your return. While I understand you may need time to reflect, I believe we can resolve this situation amicably if we approach it with maturity and discretion. Your husband, Adrian Elena, read it twice, waiting for some emotional response. Anger, hurt, anything. Nothing came. It was like reading a business letter from a stranger. Actually, no. She'd gotten more warmth from actual strangers. She folded the letter carefully and set it aside. Her father looked up from his breakfast. Bad news? Adrian wants me to return his documents and come home. And I'm going to ignore him. Elena poured herself tea. He can send all the polite letters he wants. I'm not going back. What about the documents? Elena smiled. He said removed. He didn't say stole, which means he's not confident enough to involve the law. Because involving the law would mean admitting you had them in the first place, James said slowly, which would raise questions about why you had access to sensitive financial records, which would lead to questions about who was actually managing the estate, which would make him look incompetent. Exactly. Elena bit into a piece of toast. He won't push it. It would embarrass him. Her father grinned. You're terrifying. You already said that. It bears repeating. Yeah, boss, it... But Adrian didn't give up. The letters kept coming, one every few days, each slightly more insistent than the last. Then his lawyer sent a formal notice. Then his mother wrote, a brief note that was somehow both sympathetic and condemning. My dear Elena, I understand you are going through a difficult time. However, your continued absence is causing considerable talk. For your own reputation, you should consider returning before the situation becomes irreparable. Elena burned that one. Then, 2 weeks after she'd left, the tenant started reporting visits from Carlyle. He came to my cottage last night, Miller said, standing in Whitmore's parlor with his hat in his hands, told me that anyone who cooperates with outside agitators would find their lease terminated. Elena's jaw tightened. Did he threaten you specifically? He said accidents happen, equipment fails, crops get diseased. Miller's voice was steady, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. He was real clear about it without actually saying anything actionable. He's trying to scare people off. It's working. Half the people who were here last week won't talk to me now. Elena paced to the window, mind racing. She'd known Carlyle would retaliate, but she'd underestimated how quickly and how ruthlessly. We need to move faster, she said. How? We don't even have half the statements yet. Then we go with what we have. Elena turned to face him. The magistrate, Sir Richard Thornton. He's old guard, but he's fair. If we present the evidence directly to him, bypass Carlyle entirely... Thornton's a friend of Lord Hale's father, Miller interrupted. Was, anyway, before he died. You really think he'll side with tenants over a peer? I think he'll side with the law over friendship, if the evidence is solid. Miller didn't look convinced. Elena didn't blame him. She wasn't entirely convinced herself. But the alternative was watching Carlyle intimidate the tenants into silence, watching the evidence disappear, watching another group of people learn that fighting back just got you hurt. She'd lived that lesson for 18 months. She was done learning it. Set up a meeting, she said, with Thornton. Tomorrow if possible. Elena, do it. Miller left looking worried. Her father came in a few minutes later, drawn by the sound of raised voices. You're pushing too hard, he said without preamble. I'm pushing exactly as hard as I need to. You're going to get yourself hurt, or worse, you're going to get those tenants hurt. Elena spun on him. So what should I do? Back down? Let Carlisle win? Teach everyone that standing up for yourself just leads to threats and intimidation? I'm saying you should think about what you're risking. James's voice was firm. This isn't just about Adrian anymore. You're starting a fight that could have real consequences for real people. I know that. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're using this crusade to avoid dealing with your actual feelings about your marriage falling apart. The words hit like a slap. Elena stared at her father, breath coming short. That's not... You haven't cried, James said quietly. Not once. You haven't raged or broken down or even talked about it beyond the bare facts. You just threw yourself into work the same way you always do when something hurts too much to face. I'm fine. You're not. He crossed the room and gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. And that's okay. But you can't fight everyone else's battles to avoid fighting your own. Elena's throat burned. I don't know how to fight this one. Then maybe stop fighting for a minute. Just feel it. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was handling it, that she was strong, that she didn't need to fall apart. But the truth was, she hadn't let herself feel anything since that moment at 4 a.m. when Adrian murmured Vivian's name. She'd been numb, functioning, moving forward because stopping meant shattering. What if I can't stop? She whispered. Then I'll catch you, her father said simply. Elena broke. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't sob or scream. She just folded. Her knees gave out and her father caught her, exactly like he promised, and she buried her face in his shoulder and finally let herself grieve. For the marriage that never was. For the man who never saw her. For the version of herself she'd suffocated trying to be what someone else wanted. James held her and didn't say anything. Didn't try to fix it. Just let her shake apart in his arms while the late afternoon light faded and the house settled into quiet around them. When she finally pulled back, her face blotchy and her eyes swollen, he handed her a handkerchief without comment. Better? He asked. No, Elena said honestly, but maybe more honest. The meeting with Sir Richard Thornton happened anyway. Elena went with Miller and 2 other tenants, carrying a leather case full of documents and a stomach full of dread. Thornton's estate was smaller than Ashford Hall, but older, with the kind of weathered stone that spoke of centuries rather than decades. The man himself was in his 60s, rail-thin, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their presentation without interrupting. Elena laid out the evidence methodically, ledgers, statements, the pattern of escalating theft. She kept her voice steady, her argument logical, her emotions locked down tight. When she finished, Thornton leaned back in his chair and studied her. You're Whitmore's daughter, he said finally. I am. And Lord Hale's wife. Was. His eyebrow rose. Was? I left him 2 weeks ago. This has nothing to do with that. Doesn't it? Thornton gestured at the documents. You present me with evidence that your husband's estate manager is a thief. Evidence you gathered while you were still Lady Hale, and expect me to believe there's no personal motivation here? Elena's hands tightened on the edge of the table. My personal feelings about Lord Hale are irrelevant. The evidence speaks for itself. Evidence gathered questionably and presented by a spurned wife. Thornton shook his head. I'm sorry, Lady Hale, but this looks like revenge masquerading as justice. It's not revenge to want accountability. Even if everything you've shown me is true, Thornton continued, prosecuting Carlisle would require Lord Hale's cooperation. And somehow, I doubt he's inclined to help his estranged wife humiliate him publicly. So that's it? Miller demanded. We just accept being robbed because it's inconvenient for the landlord? I didn't say that. Thornton's voice hardened. But I also won't involve myself in what appears to be a domestic dispute playing out through estate politics. Elena stood abruptly. Thank you for your time, Sir Richard. She walked out before he could respond, before the tears of frustration could spill over, before she said something that would make everything worse. Outside, Miller caught up to her. That was a disaster. I know. Elena kept walking, needing movement, needing air. He was never going to listen. I should have realized. He's right, though, Miller said quietly. We need Lord Hale's cooperation, and you're the last person he's going to listen to right now. Elena stopped walking. Then we make him listen. How? She turned to face Miller, an idea forming, reckless, probably stupid, but the only option she had left. The tenants aren't the only ones being cheated, she said slowly. If Carlisle's skimming from their rents, he's skimming from Adrian too. We just need to make Adrian care enough to look. And how do we do that? Elena smiled, sharp and dangerous. We hit him where it actually hurts. His pride. Miller stared at her like she'd suggested they burn down Ashford Hall. His pride, he repeated slowly. You want to embarrass Lord Hale publicly. I want to force him to pay attention. Elena started walking again, her mind already racing through possibilities. Adrian doesn't care about the tenants. He doesn't care about the estate. But he cares very much about how he's perceived by his peers. So we, what? Take out an advertisement in the Times? Lord Hale's estate manager is a thief, details at 11? Not the Times. The club. Elena stopped at the edge of Thornton's property, looking back toward the main road. Adrian spends half his life at Brooks, surrounded by other landowners who all employ estate managers, all assume their properties are running smoothly. If word got out that his estate has been hemorrhaging money for years while he drank brandy in London, he'd be a laughingstock, Miller finished. Exactly. And you think humiliating him will make him help us? Elena met his eyes. I think it'll make him desperate enough to act, even if it's just to save face. Miller was quiet for a long moment, studying her. You really hate him, don't you? The question caught her off guard. Did she hate Adrian? She thought she might. Thought the numbness would eventually burn away into clean, simple fury. But standing here now, planning to systematically dismantle his reputation, she realized it wasn't hate driving her. It was something colder, more surgical. No, she said finally. I just don't care about protecting him anymore. The plan took shape over the next 3 days. Elena drafted a letter, carefully worded, meticulously detailed, outlining the extent of Carlisle's embezzlement without directly accusing Adrian of negligence. She made copies, 5 of them. Then she did something that would have horrified Lady Constance. She addressed them to 5 of the most notorious gossips in London society. Not peers, not Adrian's friends, but their wives. Women who lunched together, who traded information like currency, who could destroy a reputation over tea and scones without ever raising their voices. This is brilliant, her father said, reading over the draft. And absolutely ruthless. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. James set down the letter. Once you send these, there's no taking it back. Adrian will know exactly who leaked it. Good. He'll retaliate. Let him try. Elena sealed the first envelope. What's he going to do? Divorce me? I already left him. Ruin my reputation? I'm already the wife who abandoned her husband. He has no leverage. James didn't look convinced. People like Adrian always have leverage, and when they feel cornered, they get dangerous. Elena thought about that, about the man who'd whispered another woman's name in his sleep, who'd let his mother treat her like furniture, who'd spent 18 months not noticing that his wife was holding his entire world together. Dangerous seemed like too strong a word for someone so fundamentally passive. But then again, she'd thought she knew Adrian. Clearly, she'd been wrong about a lot of things. I'll be careful, she said, because her father needed to hear it. No, you won't. He gripped her shoulder. But I'll be here when it goes sideways anyway. The letters went out on a Friday. By Monday, the fallout had begun. It started with a terse note from Adrian's lawyer demanding Elena cease her campaign of defamation immediately. She ignored it. Then Carlisle himself showed up at Whitmore House. Elena was in the study, reviewing the latest tenant statements, when she heard the commotion at the front door. Raised voices, her father's, low and warning, and another man's, louder, angrier. She set down her pen and walked to the foyer. Carlisle stood just inside the door, his face mottled red, his expensive coat spotted with mud from the ride. Her father blocked his path, one hand resting casually on the walking stick he kept by the door, the one with the weighted handle. You had no right, Carlyle was saying, his voice shaking with rage. No right to spread lies about me, to drag my name through. He stopped when he saw Elena. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Carlyle's expression twisted into something ugly. You vindictive little... Careful, James said quietly. That's still my daughter you're talking to. Your daughter is trying to destroy my livelihood based on fabricated evidence and petty revenge. The evidence isn't fabricated, Elena interrupted, and you know it. You stole private documents. I copied documents I had legitimate access to as Lady Hale, documents that show a clear pattern of embezzlement spanning 3 years. She crossed her arms. If they're fabricated, you should have no trouble proving it. Get your own ledgers. Let's compare. Carlyle's jaw worked soundlessly. That's what I thought, Elena said. Lord Hale will hear about this. Lord Hale already knows. I sent him a copy of everything. She tilted her head. Did he not tell you? Carlyle's expression flickered, just for a second, but enough. Uncertainty, fear. He hadn't known, which meant Adrian hadn't confronted him yet, hadn't asked questions, was probably still trying to figure out how to make this go away quietly without actually dealing with the problem. Get out of my house, James said, before I throw you out. Carlyle looked between them, his hands clenching and unclenching. This isn't over. No, Elena agreed. It's not. After he left, James locked the door and turned to face her. That was a threat. I know. He's going to try something. Soon. Let him. Elena headed back to the study. Everything we've documented is already copied and distributed. Even if he destroys the originals, it won't matter. I'm not worried about the documents, Elena. I'm worried about you. She paused in the doorway. I can handle Carlyle. Can you handle Adrian? That was the real question, wasn't it? Because eventually, probably sooner than she wanted, she was going to have to face her husband. Not through lawyers or letters or carefully orchestrated public humiliation, but directly. The thought made her stomach twist, not because she was afraid of him, but because some small, stupid part of her still hoped he might surprise her, might actually see what was happening and choose to do the right thing. She crushed that hope ruthlessly. Adrian had had 18 months to see her, to choose her. He'd chosen Vivian instead. I'll handle Adrian too, she said. Hishem. The scandal broke 3 days later. Elena heard about it from Miller, who'd heard it from a merchant who'd heard it from a servant who worked at Brooks's. The story had mutated in the telling. By the time it reached her, Adrian had supposedly lost thousands of pounds, been swindled by his own staff, was on the verge of financial ruin. None of that was strictly true, but it was close enough. The real damage, though, came from somewhere Elena hadn't expected, the other landowners. Turned out, several of them employed estate managers who'd come recommended by the same lawyer who'd set up her father's predatory contracts. And once Elena's letters started circulating, people started asking questions. Within a week, 3 other estates had launched investigations into their own management. One of them found irregularities almost identical to Ashford's. Suddenly, it wasn't just about Elena and Adrian. It was about a pattern of corruption that spanned multiple properties, multiple counties, possibly multiple years. And Adrian was at the center of it, not because he'd orchestrated anything, but because his negligence had let it flourish unchecked. They're calling him the gentleman fool, James reported, reading from a London gossip sheet someone had sent. Says here he was so busy enjoying the pleasures of town that he never noticed his own estate was being pillaged. Elena should have felt triumphant. Instead, she just felt tired. Any response from him? Not to you, but apparently he's recalled Carlyle to London for consultation. James set down the paper. Whatever you did, it worked. He's paying attention now. Good. Is it, though? Her father studied her. Because once he's done dealing with Carlyle, he's going to come after you. Then I'll deal with that when it happens. But it happened sooner than she expected. That evening, a writer arrived with a letter. Not from Adrian's lawyer this time. From Adrian himself. Elena recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. Elena, we need to talk, in person. I'll be at Ashford Hall on Friday. I expect you to be there. No preamble. No explanation. Just a command. Elena read it twice, feeling anger spark in her chest. He expected her to come. expected her to drop everything and ride to Ashford Hall like a summoned servant because he'd finally decided to acknowledge the situation he'd ignored for weeks. Absolutely not, her father said when she showed him. He doesn't get to demand anything from you. I know. So you're not going. Elena stared at the letter, her mind working. The smart thing would be to refuse, to make him come here, to Whitmore House, on her territory, to maintain the upper hand she'd fought so hard to claim. But the smart thing wouldn't force a confrontation, and Elena was realizing, slowly, painfully, that she needed one. Needed to look Adrian in the eye and finally, say everything she'd swallowed for 18 months. I'm going, she said. Elena, not because he ordered me to, because I have things to say to him. She folded the letter carefully. Things I should have said a long time ago. James looked like he wanted to argue. Then he sighed. I'm coming with you. No. Yes. Father, non-negotiable. His voice was firm. You want to face him? Fine. But you're not doing it alone. What? Friday dawned cold and gray, the kind of November morning that promised rain by afternoon. Elena dressed carefully, not in the demure gowns Lady Constance had favored, but in a riding habit that was practical and severe, dark green wool with silver buttons. She braided her hair tightly and left off all jewelry except her mother's cameo. She looked, she thought, like she was going to war, which wasn't far from the truth. The ride to Ashford Hall took 40 minutes. Her father rode beside her in silence, his presence steady and reassuring. As they approached the estate, Elena felt her chest tighten. It looked exactly the same. Imposing stone walls, manicured lawns, the carefully trimmed hedges that lined the drive. Nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. Because she wasn't returning as Lady Hale, quiet and compliant and desperate to please. She was returning as Elena Whitmore, and she had no intention of shrinking herself ever again. They dismounted in the courtyard. A stable boy Elena didn't recognize took their horses. The front door opened before they reached it. Lady Constance stood in the doorway, dressed in black silk, her expression unreadable. Elena, she said, Mr. Whitmore, Adrian is in the study. Is Carlyle here? Elena asked. He was dismissed 2 days ago. Constance's tone was flat. Adrian is handling the matter personally now. How responsible of him. Constance's lips twitched, almost a smile. He's not in a pleasant mood. I thought you should know. Good, Elena said. Neither am I. She walked past Constance into the house that had been her prison, her father close behind her. The study was at the end of the east wing, a large room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and windows that overlooked the gardens. Adrian stood with his back to the door, staring out at the grounds. He didn't turn when they entered. You came, he said. You demanded it. I asked. No. You expected. Elena moved further into the room, hands clasped to keep them from shaking. You expected me to obey, just like you've expected me to be quiet and decorative and content with scraps of attention for 18 months. Adrian finally turned. He looked terrible. His coat was rumpled, his cravat askew, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. For a moment, Elena felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Then she remembered Vivian's name, whispered with tenderness in the dark, and the sympathy died. I didn't ask you here to fight, Adrian said. Then why am I here? He gestured at the desk, which was covered in papers, ledgers, statements, contracts. To explain what the hell you've done. I exposed a thief. You destroyed my reputation. I revealed the truth about how your estate was being managed. If that destroyed your reputation, maybe you should have been managing it better. Adrian's jaw clenched. You had no right. I had every right, Elena interrupted, her voice rising. I spent over a year keeping Ashford Hall running while you drank yourself stupid in London. I dealt with tenant disputes, renegotiated contracts, caught Carlyle's embezzlement before it bankrupted you. And you never noticed. Never thanked me. Never even looked at what I was doing. That wasn't your responsibility? Then whose was it? Yours? She laughed, sharp and bitter. You haven't set foot on this estate in 18 months, Adrian. You hired a steward and forgot the place existed. I trusted Carlyle. You didn't trust anyone. You just didn't care enough to check. Elena stepped closer, fury building. Do you know how many tenants came to me with problems? How many times I had to cover for your negligence? How many nights I sat up balancing books you should have been reviewing? I didn't ask you to do any of that. I know. The words burst out of her, raw and loud. You didn't ask me to do anything. You didn't ask me to love you, or help you, or even exist beyond being a pretty ornament at dinner parties. You just ignored me. And when I tried to talk to you, tried to tell you I was drowning, you changed the subject, or left the room, or found another excuse to be anywhere but here. Adrian's face had gone pale. That's not… Yes, it is. Elena's voice cracked. You married me because I was quiet, because I wouldn't challenge you or demand anything or force you to be better than mediocre. And I was so desperate to make it work that I convinced myself being invisible was the same as being loved. Elena, don't. She held up a hand. Don't apologize. Don't make excuses. Just tell me the truth for once in your life. Who is Vivian? The room went dead silent. Adrian's expression shuddered completely. I don't know what… You said her name, in your sleep, 3 times. Elena's hands were shaking now, but she didn't try to hide it. You said you'd wait for her. You made promises to her that you've never made to me. So don't you dare stand there and pretend I'm imagining things. Adrian's throat worked. She was someone I knew. Before. Before what? Before my father arranged our marriage. The admission hit like a physical blow. You loved her, Elena said quietly. Adrian didn't answer, didn't need to. His silence was confirmation enough. Did you ever love me? She asked. Even a little? I thought I could. His voice was barely audible. I thought if I just tried hard enough, the feelings would come. That I could make myself want the marriage my father arranged. But you didn't. No. Elena felt something in her chest crack apart. Not her heart, which had already broken. Something deeper. The last fragile hope that maybe, somehow, this had all been a misunderstanding. It wasn't. Adrian had never wanted her, had married her out of obligation and spent 18 months waiting to feel something he never would. Why didn't you just say no? She asked. Why marry me at all if you loved someone else? Because my father was dying, because Vivian couldn't… He stopped, running a hand through his hair. It doesn't matter. The point is, I made a choice. I married you. I tried to honor that commitment by ignoring me, by letting me manage your entire life while you pined for another woman. Elena's voice was raw. That's not honor, Adrian. That's cowardice. I know. The admission stopped her cold. What? I know, Adrian repeated, looking at her directly for the first time since she'd arrived. I know I failed you. I know I was weak and selfish and afraid to actually be married to someone who might expect things from me. I know I took everything you did and never acknowledged it because acknowledging it would mean admitting how much I needed you. Elena stared at him, speechless. You terrify me, Adrian continued. You always have. You're brilliant and capable, and you see through every weak excuse I've ever made. And I couldn't handle that. So I pretended not to notice, pretended you were just there. Background scenery in my life instead of the person holding it together. And Vivian, Adrian's expression twisted, is married to someone else, has been for 3 years. I hold on to her memory because it's easier than facing reality. What reality? That I'm not the man I pretend to be. That I've spent my entire life skating by on my family's name and my father's money without ever actually earning anything. He gestured at the papers on his desk. You saw it. You documented it. Everything you sent out, it's all true. I am the gentleman fool. I just didn't want to admit it. Elena didn't know what to say. She'd come here ready to rage at him, to burn everything down and walk away clean. She'd expected denial, defensiveness, maybe even cruelty. She hadn't expected honesty. Why tell me this now? She asked finally. Because you deserve the truth, even if it's ugly. Adrian moved closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. I can't fix what I did, can't take back 18 months of neglect, but I can at least stop lying. What do you want from me, Adrian? Nothing. He said it simply. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I needed you to know that it was never about you being insufficient. You were always too much, too smart, too strong, too real, and I was too weak to rise to that. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. I wasted 18 months of my life on you. I know. I gave up everything to be your wife, my independence, my voice, my sense of self. I know. And you just let me. Yes. Adrian's voice broke. And I will spend the rest of my life knowing I destroyed something I never deserved in the first place. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man she'd married, but the boy who'd never learned to be more than his father's shadow, who'd chosen the easy path every time and called it duty. She should hate him. Part of her did, but mostly she just felt empty. The tenants need help, she said abruptly. Carlisle's contracts need to be renegotiated. The rents need to be adjusted to actual market rates. The estate needs someone who actually understands management. Adrian nodded slowly. I'll handle it. Will you? Or will you hire another Carlisle and go back to London? I'll handle it myself. He met her eyes. I'll stay here, review everything, make the changes you documented. It's the least I can do. It's the bare minimum of what you should have been doing all along. I know that too. Elena turned toward the door, suddenly desperate to leave, to get out of this room with its suffocating memories. Elena, Adrian called. She stopped but didn't turn around. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I am sorry. Not just for the infidelity that never actually happened, but for the neglect that did. You deserved so much better than me. Yes, Elena said. I did. She walked out without looking back. Her father was waiting in the hall, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Well, he asked. He admitted everything. Elena's voice was flat. The neglect, the cowardice, all of it. How do you feel? She thought about it, tried to identify the tangle of emotions in her chest. Tired, she said finally, and ready to go home. They were halfway to the front door when they heard shouting from outside. Elena and her father exchanged a glance, then hurried toward the sound. The courtyard was chaos. Miller and half a dozen other tenants had gathered at the gates, facing down two men Elena didn't recognize. One of them was holding a torch despite the fact that it was barely past noon. What's going on? Elena demanded, striding forward. Miller turned, relief flashing across his face. They're from Carlisle. Came to deliver a message about what happens to people who cross him. The man with the torch grinned, just making sure everyone understands that accidents happen, especially to troublemakers. Elena went very still. Are you threatening my tenants? Ain't your tenants, lady. You left, remember? That's where you're wrong. Elena stepped forward, letting every ounce of fury she'd been holding back flood into her voice. I may have left my husband, but I didn't leave these people. And if you think you can intimidate them without consequences, you're about to learn otherwise. Yeah? What are you going to do about it? I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what Carlisle's doing. Elena's smile was sharp. Starting with the magistrate, the London papers, and every landowner in the county. By the time I'm done, he won't be able to get work as a stable hand, let alone an estate manager. The man's grin faltered. And if anything happens to these people or their property, Elena continued, her voice dropping to something dangerous, I will personally ensure Carlisle is prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We have documentation, witnesses, evidence that will hold up in any court. You're bluffing. Try me. They stared at each other, tension crackling in the air. Then Adrian's voice cut through the silence. She's not bluffing. Elena turned. Adrian stood on the front steps, his mother beside him, both of them watching the confrontation with identical expressions of cold fury. And neither am I, Adrian continued, descending the steps. Carlisle is already facing charges. If you're here on his behalf, you're now complicit in witness intimidation. I suggest you leave before I have the magistrate's men arrest you. The man with the torch looked between them, clearly reassessing. This ain't over, he muttered. Yes, Elena said quietly. It is. The men left, taking their threats with them. The tenants erupted into relieved conversation, Miller gripping Elena's arm in silent thanks. But Elena's attention was on Adrian, who stood a few feet away, looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time. Thank you, she said. You shouldn't have to thank me for doing the bare minimum, he replied, but you're welcome anyway. Lady Constance cleared her throat delicately. Perhaps we should discuss next steps inside, before anyone else decides to make threats. They reconvened in the drawing room, Elena, her father, Adrian, Constance, and Miller representing the tenants. Carlyle will retaliate, Constance said without preamble. Today was just a warning. Let him try, Elena said. We have enough evidence to bury him. Evidence helps in court. It doesn't stop arson or sabotage. Adrian was pacing now, tension radiating off him. We need protection for the tenants, patrols, someone watching the properties until this is resolved. I'll organize it, Miller offered. Most of us are armed anyway. We just need coordination. And legal action, Elena added. Fast, before Carlyle escalates. I'll contact the magistrate today, Adrian said. Press for immediate prosecution. They spent the next hour planning security rotations, legal strategy, communication protocols. It was strange working alongside Adrian like this, almost like being partners, almost like the marriage could have been if he'd ever actually tried. When the meeting finally ended and the tenants filed out, Elena stood to leave. Wait, Adrian said. She paused. I meant what I said earlier, about staying, about fixing this. He looked exhausted but determined. I know I don't deserve another chance, but these people do, and I'm going to make sure they get one. Elena studied him, looking for the lie, the excuse, the easy way out he'd always chosen before. She didn't see it. Maybe he was finally being honest. Maybe he'd actually change. Or maybe this was just another performance, and in 6 months he'd be back in London, leaving someone else to clean up his mess. Either way, it wasn't her problem anymore. Good luck, she said. Then she turned and walked away from Ashford Hall for the second time, her father beside her, the afternoon light slanting through the clouds like a promise. Behind them, Adrian stood in the doorway, watching them go. And for the first time in 18 months, Elena didn't look back. But 3 days later, everything exploded. Elena was reviewing contracts in her father's study when Miller burst through the door, wild-eyed and out of breath. Fire, he gasped. At the Ashford tenant cottages, 3 buildings, started at the same time. It wasn't an accident. Elena's blood went cold. Carlyle. Has to be, but there's more. Miller's hands were shaking. They found evidence, documents hidden in one of the cottages that burned. Before it was destroyed, someone grabbed them. What kind of documents? Proof that Carlyle wasn't working alone. That lawyer who set up the contracts? He's part of it, and there's others. A whole network of them, running the same scheme across half the county. Elena sat down hard. How many estates? At least a dozen, maybe more. Miller looked sick. And they know we found out. That's why they torched the cottages. They're trying to destroy the evidence. Did anyone get hurt? No, everyone got out. But Lady Hale, Elena, this is bigger than we thought. Way bigger. And if they're willing to commit arson to hide it, he didn't have to finish the sentence. Elena stood, mind racing. They needed to move fast. Get the evidence somewhere safe. Contact authorities with jurisdiction beyond the local magistrate. Protect the people who'd already risked everything to help. Get everyone together, she said. Tonight, we're going to... The front door slammed open. Adrian stood in the doorway, covered in soot, his coat singed, fury and fear warring in his expression. They tried to kill them, he said, voice shaking. Lock the doors from outside and set the fires. If Miller's brother hadn't broken through a window... He stopped, seeing Miller standing there. Everyone's safe, Miller confirmed. Barely. Adrian's jaw clenched. This ends now. Agreed, Elena said. But we need proof that will stand up to... I have it. Adrian pulled a leather portfolio from inside his coat. Everything. The network, the payments, the contracts. Carlyle kept records. Detailed ones. I found them in his rooms before I sacked him. You've had this for 3 days and didn't tell me? I was trying to handle it quietly. People almost died, Adrian. I know. He slammed the portfolio on the desk. I know, and I'm sorry, and I should have given this to the authorities immediately instead of thinking I could manage it without causing a scene. I was wrong. Again. Elena stared at him, at the soot on his face and the raw honesty in his eyes, and made a decision. We take it to London, she said. To the courts there. Bypass the local corruption entirely. I'll go, Adrian said immediately. We'll both go. Elena picked up the portfolio. This affects both our estates now, and we're not letting Carlyle or his network burn any more lives to hide their crimes. Her father appeared in the doorway. If you're going to London, you're taking guards. And witnesses, Miller added. I'm coming too. Elena looked around at them. Her father, her almost ex-husband, the tenants who'd trusted her, and felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't about her marriage anymore. It wasn't about Adrian or Carlyle, or even justice for what had been done to her. It was about stopping something bigger, something that had been destroying lives in the shadows for years. And for the first time since she'd left Ashford Hall, Elena felt like she had a purpose that was entirely hers. Then we leave at dawn, she said, and we don't stop until every single one of them is finished. They left before sunrise, when the sky was still bruised purple and the frost hadn't lifted from the ground. Elena rode beside Adrian in the carriage. Her father had insisted on the closed coach rather than horseback, citing safety, though she suspected he just wanted them contained where guards could actually protect them. Miller and two other tenants rode alongside as additional security, armed and watchful. The portfolio sat between Elena and Adrian like a third passenger, bulging with evidence that could either save them or get them killed. Neither of them had slept. Elena could see it in the tight lines around Adrian's eyes, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching on his knees. He'd changed from his soot-stained clothes into traveling wear, but he still smelled faintly of smoke. You should have told me about the documents sooner, she said, breaking the silence that had stretched for the first hour of travel. I know. People could have died. I know that too. Adrian's voice was rough. I thought if I could just handle it quietly, present it to the magistrate with a neat solution already worked out, nobody else would have to be involved. Nobody else would be at risk. That's not how this works. I'm aware. He finally looked at her. I spent 18 months thinking I could manage things from a distance, never getting my hands dirty, never actually confronting problems directly. Old habits. Elena studied him. The Adrian she'd married would have made excuses, deflected blame, found a way to make his failure someone else's responsibility. This version just sat there, owning it. It was unsettling. What changed, she asked. What do you mean? Between the man who ignored his estate for 18 months and the man who ran into burning buildings yesterday. What changed? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the passing countryside. You did. Or rather, you leaving did. I don't understand. When you were there, I could pretend everything was fine. You fixed problems before I even knew they existed. You kept everything running smoothly enough that I never had to face how useless I actually was. He turned back to her. But when you left, it all fell apart. Within days, I had tenants showing up with complaints I didn't know how to handle, contracts I couldn't interpret, decisions I had no idea how to make. And I realized, finally, stupidly, how much I'd been depending on you to be the adult while I played at being a lord. So you're saying I enabled you? No, I'm saying I took advantage of your competence to avoid developing my own. Adrian's jaw tightened. And when your letters started circulating, when people started asking me questions about my own estate that I couldn't answer, I had to face exactly how pathetic that was. Elena didn't know what to say to that. The carriage hit a rut, jostling them both. Outside, she could hear Miller calling out to the driver to watch the road. The tenants respect you now, she said finally. They didn't before. They shouldn't have before. I didn't deserve it. Adrian picked up the portfolio, weighing it in his hands. But maybe if I actually do something with this, if I follow through for once, I can start earning it. And if you can't? If the courts don't care, or Carlyle's connections run too deep, or we end up with nothing but targets on our backs? Then at least I'll know I tried, that I actually stood up for something instead of just letting other people fight my battles. He met her eyes. The way you've been doing all along. The conversation died after that, both of them lost in their own thoughts as the miles rolled past. They stopped once to change horses and grab food at a coaching inn. Elena caught sight of herself in a mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back, hair escaping its pins, dark circles under her eyes, dressed in practical traveling clothes that would have mortified Lady Constance. She looked alive. Miller appeared at her elbow as she was ordering tea. You holding up? Better than I expected. Elena accepted the cup from the innkeeper. You? Honestly? I'm terrified. He kept his voice low. We're about to accuse some very powerful people of serious crimes. If this goes wrong, it won't. You can't know that. No, Elena admitted, but I know sitting back and doing nothing guarantees they keep destroying lives. At least this way we have a chance. Miller studied her. You're different than you were, at Ashford, I mean, before. How so? You don't apologize anymore for taking up space, for having opinions, for existing loudly. He smiled slightly. It suits you. Elena felt something warm unfold in her chest. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Wait until we're not all potentially on fire. They reached London by late afternoon, the city sprawling before them in a chaos of smoke and noise and humanity. Elena had been here a handful of times for her wedding, for a few miserable social seasons where Adrian had paraded her around like a prize he'd already lost interest in. She'd hated it then. But riding in now, with purpose burning in her chest and evidence that could topple an entire criminal network, the city felt different, like a battlefield instead of a prison. Adrian directed them to a townhouse in a respectable but not ostentatious neighborhood. It belonged to a friend, he explained, who was currently abroad and had left him a key. We'll stay here tonight, he said as they climbed out of the carriage, stiff and sore from hours of travel. Tomorrow, we go to the courts. Not the magistrate? Miller asked. The magistrate is local, potentially compromised. We're going straight to the Lord Chancellor's office. Adrian grabbed the portfolio. They handle cases involving widespread corruption. This qualifies. Inside, the townhouse was dusty but serviceable. Elena claimed a room on the second floor and immediately set about reviewing the documents again, cross-referencing Carlyle's records with her own notes. The scope of it was staggering. 12 estates, possibly more. Years of coordinated theft dressed up as legitimate business. Lawyers, estate managers, even a few local officials all working together to systematically rob landowners who were either too trusting, too absent, or too incompetent to notice. Adrian had been all three. A knock at the door interrupted her reading. Come in. Adrian entered carrying a tray with tea and sandwiches. You need to eat. I'm working. You can do both. He set the tray down and gestured at the papers spread across the bed. Find anything new? 3 more estates than we originally thought. And look at this. Elena pointed at a column of figures. The payments all route through the same banking house. If we can get those records, we can track exactly where the money went and who benefited. Adrian leaned over her shoulder, studying the page. That's brilliant. It's basic accounting, which you understand and I don't. Elena glanced up at him. He was close enough that she could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the way he was holding himself too carefully, like he might break if he relaxed. When's the last time you slept? She asked. I could ask you the same thing. I asked first. Adrian sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb her papers. The night before you left. Really slept, I mean. Since then it's been an hour here, 2 there. Mostly I just lie awake thinking about all the ways I've failed. That's not productive. No. But it's honest. He rubbed his face. I keep replaying it. Every moment I chose comfort over responsibility. Every time you tried to tell me something was wrong and I changed the subject. His voice cracked. Every time I whispered her name instead of yours. Elena went very still. You remember that? I didn't. Not at first. But you mentioned it during our fight, and I started thinking about my dreams, and he looked at her, miserable. I've been using Vivian as an excuse, a way to avoid being present in my actual life. She was safe because she was imaginary. The real woman married someone else and moved on years ago, but the fantasy of her let me pretend I was tragic and romantic instead of just cowardly and lazy. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know, and because I'm trying, badly, probably, to stop lying to myself about who I am and what I've done. Adrian stood abruptly. I'll let you work. Just, please eat something. He was halfway to the door when Elena spoke. Adrian? He stopped, not turning around. What you said, about trying to be better. I believe you. She kept her voice steady. I don't know if it's enough. I don't know if we can fix what's broken between us, but I believe you're trying. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you. After he left, Elena stared at the closed door for a long time. Then she picked up a sandwich and went back to work. The next morning, they presented themselves at the Lord Chancellor's office at precisely 9 o'clock. The building was imposing, all marble columns and vaulted ceilings designed to remind visitors that they stood in the presence of authority. Elena had worn her most severe dress, dark blue with minimal ornamentation, her hair pulled back so tightly it made her scalp ache. She looked like someone to be taken seriously. Adrian stood beside her in formal court dress, the portfolio under his arm, his expression set in lines of grim determination. Miller and the other tenants waited outside. They'd wanted to come in, but Adrian had convinced them it would be better to have just the two of them make the initial presentation. Less chance of being dismissed as a mob. The clerk who met them was young, officious, and clearly skeptical. "Lord Hale," he said, barely glancing at Elena. "I wasn't aware you had an appointment." "I don't, but I have evidence of widespread criminal conspiracy that the Lord Chancellor needs to see immediately." The clerk's eyebrow rose. "I'm sure you do, as do the dozen other people who've made similar claims this week. If you'd like to file a formal complaint..." "This isn't a complaint. It's documentation of embezzlement, fraud, and arson spanning multiple estates and involving members of the legal profession." Adrian set the portfolio on the clerk's desk with a heavy thud. "And if you don't bring this to the Lord Chancellor's attention within the hour, I'll go to every newspaper in London and explain exactly how his office ignored evidence of a criminal conspiracy that nearly murdered innocent tenants." The clerk blinked. "Are you threatening..." "I'm informing you of consequences," Elena interrupted smoothly. "We have witness testimony, financial records, and physical evidence of arson, all of which will become public knowledge if this office chooses to obstruct justice." The young man looked between them, clearly trying to decide if they were serious. "Wait here," he said finally, and disappeared through a door marked private. They waited and waited. Elena counted the tiles on the floor. Adrian paced. Somewhere in the building, a clock chimed 10. Finally, the door opened again. But it wasn't the clerk who emerged. It was a man in his 50s, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, wearing the robes of a senior official. He held the portfolio Elena and Adrian had brought, and his expression was unreadable. "Lord Hale, Lady Hale," he nodded to each of them. "I'm Robert Ashworth, senior counsel to the Lord Chancellor. I've reviewed your materials." "And?" Adrian asked. "And you've either uncovered one of the most extensive fraud schemes I've seen in 20 years, or you've fabricated an elaborate fiction." Ashworth's gaze was piercing. "I need to determine which." "Everything in that portfolio is real," Elena said. "Cross-referenced, verified, and backed by witness testimony from multiple sources." "So you say. But you'll understand if I'm skeptical of evidence gathered by an estranged wife against her husband's estate manager." "I'm not estranged," Adrian said sharply. "We're here together, presenting this jointly." Ashworth's eyebrows rose slightly. "Interesting. Most couples don't collaborate quite so effectively when their marriage is falling apart." "Our marriage is complicated," Elena said. "The evidence isn't. Check the banking records. Interview the tenants. Inspect the burned cottages. Everything we've documented can be independently verified." "Oh, we will verify it thoroughly." Ashworth tucked the portfolio under his arm. "But that will take time, weeks, possibly months. In the meanwhile, I need you to understand that bringing accusations like this carries serious consequences. If you're wrong, if this is exaggeration or revenge masquerading as justice, you'll face charges yourselves." "We're not wrong," Adrian said quietly. "And we're not leaving until you take this seriously." "I'm taking it seriously. That's why I'm warning you." Ashworth looked between them. "People with this much to lose don't go quietly. If even half of what you've alleged is true, you've made enemies who will do everything in their power to discredit or silence you. Are you prepared for that?" Elena thought about the burning cottages, the threats, the systematic way Carlyle and his network had destroyed anyone who got in their way. "Yes," she said, "we're prepared." The investigation moved faster than Elena expected. Ashworth assigned a team of clerks to verify the banking records. Investigators were dispatched to the burned cottages. Witnesses were interviewed under oath. And slowly, painfully, the full scope of the conspiracy emerged. It was worse than they'd thought. 17 estates, not 12. 20 years, not 3. Millions of pounds siphoned off through false contracts, inflated expenses, and outright theft. And at the center of it all, a lawyer named Edmund Price who'd built an entire enterprise on exploiting trusting landowners. Carlyle had just been one of his employees. The news broke in the papers 6 days after their initial meeting. Massive fraud uncovered, the headline screamed. Pier's estate at center of investigation. Adrian's name was everywhere. But so was Elena's. The reporters loved the angle. The brilliant wife who'd uncovered the crime. The negligent husband who'd finally stepped up. The dramatic confrontation between old money and new accountability. Some of the coverage was sympathetic. Some of it was vicious. Elena stopped reading after the third article called her a shrewish harridan who couldn't accept her proper place. "They're going to crucify us," she said, staring at the newspapers spread across the townhouse dining table. "Let them." Adrian tossed another paper onto the pile. "We're winning." "Are we?" Price has been arrested. 3 of his associates are in custody. The banking house is cooperating with investigators. Adrian's smile was grim. "For the first time in my useless life, I'm actually accomplishing something. I'll take the bad press." Miller burst through the door before Elena could respond, waving a letter. "You need to see this." Elena took the letter. It was from Sir Richard Thornton, the magistrate who'd dismissed them weeks ago. "Lord and Lady Hale, I owe you an apology. I dismissed your evidence as personal vendetta when I should have investigated further. Your persistence has exposed corruption I should have caught years ago. While my oversight doesn't excuse my failure, please know that I am working with the Lord Chancellor's office to ensure justice is served. Additionally, I am personally sponsoring a review of estate management practices across the county to prevent future abuses." Respectfully, Sir Richard Thornton. Elena read it twice, not quite believing what she was seeing. "He apologized," she said. "He admitted he was wrong," Adrian corrected. "In writing, to be used as evidence." He looked at Miller. "The other landowners?" Starting to ask questions. 3 have already launched their own investigations. 2 more are meeting with their tenants to review grievances. Miller grinned. "You started something." Elena felt it then. The shift. The moment when they stopped being victims, reacting to circumstances, and became forces actually shaping outcomes. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. "We need to stay ahead of this," she said, mind already racing. "If other estates are investigating, they'll need frameworks, standards, ways to verify their managers aren't corrupt." "You want to create oversight structures," Adrian said slowly. "I want to make sure this can't happen again. Not just at Ashford, but anywhere." Elena started pacing, ideas cascading. Written guidelines for estate management, regular audits, tenant representation in disputes, make it standard practice instead of optional. That's ambitious. It's necessary. Miller was watching her with something like awe. "You know what you sound like." "What?" "Someone who's going to change how half the country manages property." He shook his head. "And they said you were just a quiet little wife." Elena laughed, sharp and slightly wild. "Turns out I was never very good at being quiet." The breakthrough came 10 days later. Ashworth summoned them back to his office, his expression carefully neutral. "We've traced the money," he said without preamble, spreading documents across his desk. "Price's network was extensive, but sloppy once we knew where to look. We've recovered approximately 40% of the stolen funds. The rest appears to have been spent or hidden offshore." 40%, Adrian repeated. "Out of how much total?" "Roughly £2 million. Elena felt the number hit like a physical blow. 2 million. Stolen over 20 years from families who'd trusted their managers, their lawyers, their systems. "What happens now?" she asked. "Prosecutions. Price and his primary associates will face trial. The recovered funds will be distributed back to the affected estates proportionally." Ashworth looked at them both. "And the Lord Chancellor wants to meet with you." "Why?" "Because you've exposed a systemic problem that goes beyond individual corruption, and he's interested in your proposals for reform." Elena's heart stuttered. "My proposals?" "Word of your suggested oversight structures reached his office. He's considering making them official policy for Crown lands, possibly recommending them for private estates as well." Ashworth's expression softened slightly. "You've done something remarkable here, both of you." After they left Ashworth's office, Adrian and Elena walked through London in silence, processing what had just happened. "They're actually listening," Elena said finally. Of course they are. You're brilliant. I'm persistent. There's a difference. Adrian stopped walking, forcing her to face him. No, you're brilliant. You always have been. I was just too stupid and self-absorbed to see it. Elena studied his face, looking for the lie, the performance, the easy words he'd always relied on. She saw only truth. What happens now? She asked. With us, I mean. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I want to say we can fix this, that we can go back and start over and build something real this time. But I don't know if that's possible. It's not. He flinched. We can't go back, Elena continued. I'm not that person anymore. The one who made herself small and quiet and acceptable. I won't be her again, even for you. I know. And I wouldn't want you to. Adrian's voice was rough. The woman you are now, fierce and uncompromising and absolutely terrifying, that's who I should have married in the first place. That's who I should have seen. But you didn't. No, I didn't, and I can't change that. He looked at her steadily. But I can be better now. Not for you, because you don't owe me anything. But for myself. Because I'm tired of being the weak man who lets other people carry his responsibilities. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of understanding. I need time, she said. To figure out who I am outside of being your wife. To build something that's entirely mine. I know. And I need you to actually follow through. Not just with the reforms, but with being present. With doing the work instead of delegating it and hoping for the best. I will. Adrian's jaw set. I swear to you, I will. Then maybe... Elena stopped, not quite ready to finish the thought. Maybe? Adrian prompted gently. Maybe eventually we can figure out if there's anything left worth saving. But not now. Not while everything's still raw. I'll wait, Adrian said simply. However long it takes. 3 weeks later, they returned to Ashford Hall together. The tenants had organized a gathering in the village square. Not exactly a celebration, but close. The threat of Carlisle was gone. Price was in custody. The stolen money was being recovered. For the first time in years, people felt safe. Elena stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Miller organize the food tables with the same efficiency he brought to everything. Adrian appeared at her elbow, 2 cups of cider in hand. Peace offering? She took the cup. We're not at war. Aren't we? Not anymore. I think we've moved into complicated alliance territory. Adrian laughed, genuinely laughed, the sound surprised and rusty. I'll take it. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the gathering. Then Lady Constance approached, dressed in her customary black expression unreadable. Mother, Adrian said warily. Son, daughter-in-law. She nodded to each of them. I hear congratulations are in order. For what? Elena asked. For refusing to be silent when silence would have been easier. For fighting when fighting seemed futile. For being exactly the kind of woman this family has needed for generations and never had the sense to value. Constance's lips twitched. I'm proud of you. Elena blinked, certain she'd misheard. You're what? Proud. Don't make me repeat it. Constance turned to Adrian. And you finally stopped being your father's shadow and became your own man. Took you long enough. Thank you? Don't thank me. Thank your wife. She's the one who forced you to grow up. Constance started to walk away, then paused. Oh, and Adrian, if you ever whisper another woman's name in your sleep again, I'll disown you myself. She swept off, leaving them both staring. Did your mother just, Elena started, compliment you? Yes. And threaten you? Also yes. Adrian rubbed his face. I think that means she approves. Miller called for attention then, raising his cup. To Lady Elena and Lord Adrian, for seeing what needed to be done and having the spine to do it. The crowd echoed the toast, voices rising in genuine warmth. Elena felt tears prick her eyes but refused to let them fall. She'd cried enough. This moment wasn't about grief or loss or what could have been. It was about what was. A community healing. A system changing. A woman who'd found her voice and refused to lower it ever again. Adrian leaned close, his voice just for her. You did this. We did this, Elena corrected. You started it. I just stopped being useless long enough to help finish it. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man she'd married, but someone new, someone still figuring out how to be worthy of the space he occupied. It wasn't enough. Not yet. But it was a start. Come on, she said, tugging his sleeve. We should actually talk to the people we helped. They waded into the crowd together, separate but moving in the same direction. And for the first time in 18 months, Elena felt like maybe, just maybe, they were finally on the same side. The gathering lasted until well past dark, fueled by cider and relief and the kind of cautious hope that came from surviving something you weren't sure you would. Elena talked to every tenant who approached her, and there were many. They wanted to thank her, to share their own stories of Carlisle's abuses, to ask questions about what came next. She answered as honestly as she could, even when honesty meant admitting she didn't have all the solutions yet. Adrian worked the other side of the square, and Elena watched him with something like curiosity. He was actually listening to people, not just nodding politely while thinking about something else, but genuinely engaging, asking follow-up questions, taking notes. It was strange seeing him like this, present, trying. He's different, Miller said, appearing beside her with a fresh cup of cider. He's performing, Elena said automatically, then stopped herself. No, that's not fair. He is different. I just don't know if it'll last. Does it matter? Right now, today, he showed up. That's more than he's done in years. Miller took a long drink. People notice. Elena glanced around the square. Miller was right. The tenants were watching Adrian with a mixture of surprise and tentative approval. Not trust, not yet, but willingness to see if the change was real. What about you? Miller asked. You staying at Ashford? The question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that she hadn't thought beyond it. I don't know. You should. We need you here. You need competent management. That doesn't have to be me. Doesn't it? Miller's voice was gentle but firm. You started this. You fought for us when you didn't have to. You can't just walk away now. I'm not walking away. Elena stopped, frustrated. I don't know what I am. Adrian's wife, but not really. The estate manager, but not officially. I'm in this strange, in-between place, and I hate it. So pick a side. It's not that simple. Sure it is. Miller set down his cup. Either you want to be part of rebuilding this place, or you don't. Everything else is just details. He walked away before she could argue, leaving Elena standing alone with her uncertainty. She found Adrian later leaning against the wall of the village hall, looking exhausted but oddly content. Successful evening? She asked. I think so. Nobody threw anything at me, at least. He smiled slightly. That's progress. Low bar? I'm working with what I've got. Adrian straightened. I've been thinking about what you said, about needing time to figure out who you are outside of being my wife. Elena's stomach tightened. Adrian, let me finish. He held up a hand. You're right. You deserve that time and space, but I also need you to know that I want you to stay. Not as my wife, or not just as my wife, but as a partner in actually running this estate properly. You want to hire me? I want to give you what you should have had from the beginning. Authority, recognition, compensation for the work you've been doing anyway. Adrian's expression was serious. I'm proposing we formalize it. Make you the official estate manager. You'd have full control over operations, contracts, tenant relations, everything Carlisle was supposed to be doing. Elena stared at him. You're serious? Completely. I'll handle the social obligations, the political maneuvering, the parts that require a title. But the actual running of Ashford? That's yours. If you want it. What about us? That's separate. We figure out the marriage, or whatever we're calling it, on its own timeline. No pressure, no expectations, just two people trying to be better than they were. He met her eyes. What do you say? Elena's mind raced. It was a good offer. More than good. It was exactly what she would have asked for if she'd thought to ask. But accepting meant staying at Ashford, meant tying herself to this place and this man, even if the terms were different now. I need to think about it, she said finally. Take all the time you need. Adrian pushed off the wall. I'm not going anywhere. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in the guest room at Ashford Hall, not the bedroom she'd shared with Adrian, but a smaller space she'd claimed as her own, and stared at the ceiling, turning over Miller's words and Adrian's offer and her own tangled feelings. What did she actually want? For 18 months, she'd wanted Adrian to see her, to value her, to choose her. He was offering that now. In his own imperfect, late-to-the-party way, he was offering exactly what she'd craved. But did she still want it? Or had she changed too much in the wanting? She got out of bed and went to the window. The grounds of Ashford Hall stretched out below, dark and quiet. She'd walked these paths 100 times, managed these lands, fought for these people. Somewhere along the way, they'd become hers. Not because of her marriage, because of her choice. The realization settled something in her chest. She knew what she wanted. The next morning, Elena found Adrian in the estate office, surrounded by paperwork and looking slightly overwhelmed. "I'll do it," she said without preamble. Adrian looked up, hope flashing across his face before he controlled it. "The position?" "Yes, but I have conditions." "Name them." Elena pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "First, I want it in writing. A formal contract with my name, my title, and my salary clearly stated." "Done." "Second, I want autonomy. You don't override my decisions about estate management. If we disagree, we discuss it like equals, not like a lord instructing his subordinate." "Agreed." "Third, I want the tenants to have official representation, a council that meets quarterly to raise concerns and have input on policies that affect them." Adrian hesitated, then nodded. "That's actually a good idea. It'll prevent another Carlisle situation." "Fourth," Elena took a breath, "I want my own residence. Not here in the main house. One of the cottages on the property, renovated for my use, somewhere that's mine." Adrian's expression flickered, hurt, maybe, or disappointment, but he kept his voice steady. "May I ask why?" "Because I need space to figure out who I am without constantly bumping into who we were. And because if we're going to rebuild anything between us, it can't be in rooms full of memories of me being invisible." "I understand." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You can have Rosedale Cottage. It's been empty for years, but it's structurally sound. We can have it renovated however you want." "Thank you." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were agreeing to settling between them. "For what it's worth," Adrian said quietly, "I think you're right. About all of it. You deserve your own space, your own authority, your own life that isn't defined by being attached to me." "I'm glad you see that. I wish I'd seen it 18 months ago. Or before we married, or literally any time before you had to leave to make me pay attention." He rubbed his face. "But better late than never, I suppose." "That depends on what you do with it," Elena said. "Seeing the problem is one thing. Actually changing is another." "Then watch me change." It wasn't a promise. It was a challenge. Elena found herself smiling despite everything. "I will." The trial of Edmund Price and his associates began in late December. Elena and Adrian attended every day of proceedings, sitting in the gallery with Miller and several other tenants who'd traveled to London to see justice done. The evidence was overwhelming. Documents, testimony, financial records, all of it pointing to a conspiracy that had stolen from families, destroyed livelihoods, and corrupted the system meant to protect property rights. Price's defense tried to paint him as a legitimate businessman who'd been betrayed by rogue employees. But the prosecution, led by a fierce woman named Margaret Hastings, who reminded Elena forcefully of herself, systematically dismantled every argument. "The defendant didn't just enable this fraud," Hastings said in her closing statement, her voice carrying through the courtroom. "He orchestrated it. He built a network specifically designed to exploit the trust landowners placed in their professional advisors. And when confronted with evidence of wrongdoing, he ordered arson to destroy that evidence and intimidate witnesses." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted, some people cheering, others protesting, absolute chaos. Elena sat frozen, feeling the verdict wash over her like a wave. They'd won. Actually, truly won. Adrian grabbed her hand, squeezing hard. "We did it. The jury did it. The jury had evidence because you refused to let this go." His voice was rough with emotion. "This is your victory, Elena. Own it." Miller was openly crying, not bothering to hide it. Other tenants were embracing, laughing, releasing months of tension in one cathartic moment. Elena felt tears sliding down her own face and didn't try to stop them. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed them. "Lady Hale, how do you feel about the verdict? Lord Hale, what's next for Ashford Estate? Is it true you've been estranged from your husband throughout this investigation?" Elena stepped forward before Adrian could answer. "The verdict is a victory for every family that was stolen from, for every tenant who was intimidated into silence, for every person who believed the system couldn't be challenged." Her voice was clear and firm. "And I hope it sends a message that corruption, no matter how well connected or established, will not be tolerated." "What about your marriage?" someone called out. "My marriage is none of your concern, but my work is. I've been named official estate manager of Ashford Hall, and I'll be implementing reforms to ensure this kind of abuse never happens again. Those reforms will be made available to any estate that wants to adopt them." "So you're staying with Lord Hale?" "I'm staying at Ashford. The rest is private." She walked away before they could ask more questions, Adrian falling into step beside her. "That was incredible," he murmured. "That was exhausting." Elena flagged down a carriage. "Take me home." "Ashford or your father's estate?" Elena paused, considering. 6 months ago, the answer would have been automatic, anywhere but Ashford. But now, "Ashford," she said. "I have work to do." The renovations on Rosedale Cottage took 3 months. Elena threw herself into the project with the same intensity she'd brought to exposing Price. She worked alongside the builders, making decisions about layout and materials, insisting on practical details like proper insulation and a workspace large enough for estate business. It was the first space in her adult life that was entirely hers. No husband's preferences. No mother-in-law's opinions. No expectations of what a lady's residence should look like. Just Elena, building something from the ground up. Adrian visited occasionally, always asking permission first, offering suggestions only when invited. He was trying so hard to respect her boundaries that it was almost painful to watch. "You don't have to treat me like I'll shatter if you express an opinion," she said one afternoon while reviewing paint samples. "I'm trying to give you space. There's space and there's absence. You can be present without being controlling." Elena set down the samples. "Talk to me like a person, Adrian, not like a fragile thing you're afraid to touch." "I don't know how to do that without falling back into old patterns." "Then learn. We're both learning." She softened slightly. "I appreciate the effort, really, but you're overcorrecting. I need a partner who can have opinions and disagreements and still respect when I make final decisions, not someone who just agrees with everything to avoid conflict." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. "I think that's the first time you've called me a partner." "Well, that's what we're building toward, isn't it?" Elena picked up a blue sample. "What do you think of this color?" "I think it's too dark for a workspace. You'll strain your eyes reading in that light." He pointed to a lighter shade. "This one would be better." You're right." Elena marked the lighter color. "See? That wasn't so hard." Adrian smiled, genuinely smiled, the expression reaching his eyes. Progress. One decision at a time. The cottage was finished in early March, just as the first hints of spring started appearing in the gardens. Elena moved in with minimal fanfare, just her clothes, her books, her mother's cameo, and the documents that had started everything. She stood in the middle of her new sitting room and felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Not happiness, not yet, but the kind of quiet contentment that came from having a space that reflected who she actually was instead of who she was supposed to be. That evening, Adrian knocked on her door holding a bottle of wine and looking uncertain. "Housewarming gift?" he offered. Elena stepped back to let him in. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." He looked around the cottage, taking in the practical furniture, the desk covered in estate paperwork, the complete absence of decorative nonsense. "It suits you." "Thank you." They opened the wine and sat in her small dining area, conversation flowing easier than it had in months. Adrian told her about the latest tenant meeting. He'd been running them himself, with only occasional input from Elena, and she told him about the drainage problem on the eastern fields that needed addressing before the spring rains. It was domestic, normal, the kind of conversation they should have been having all along. "I talked to Vivian," Adrian said suddenly. Elena went still. "What?" I wrote to her, asked to meet. We had coffee last week in London. He stared at his wine. I needed to stop making her into something she wasn't. A fantasy. An excuse. And she's just a person. Someone I cared about once, who made her own choices, who's perfectly happy with the life she built without me. Adrian looked up. She told me I was an idiot for not appreciating what I had, that you sounded remarkable based on everything she'd read about the trial. Elena didn't know what to say to that. I'm letting her go, Adrian continued. Really letting her go. No more dreams about what could have been. No more using her memory to avoid being present. He met Elena's eyes. I'm choosing to be here, now, with you, if you'll have me. I'm not ready, Elena said quietly. I know. I don't know if I'll ever be ready to go back to being your wife the way we were. I'm not asking you to. Adrian reached across the table but didn't touch her, just left his hand there as an offering. I'm asking if you'd consider building something new. No expectations, no assumptions. Just two people trying to figure out if they can be partners in more than just estate management. Elena looked at his hand, at the man offering it, at the uncertain future stretching ahead. She thought about the woman she'd been at 4 a.m. that November morning. Silent, broken, desperate to be seen. She wasn't that woman anymore. She'd burned that version of herself down and built something stronger from the ashes. The question was whether Adrian could stand beside that stronger version without trying to dim her fire. Ask me again in 6 months, she said finally. Adrian's hand curled back toward himself, but he was smiling. Fair enough. 6 months later, on a warm September evening, Adrian found Elena in the estate office reviewing harvest projections. Working late? He asked from the doorway. Just finishing up. Elena set down her pen. What do you need? To ask you a question. Something in his tone made her look up. He was dressed nicely, not formal, but careful, like he'd put thought into it. What question? Adrian crossed the room and sat across from her desk. Not looming, not presuming, just waiting. 6 months ago, you told me to ask you again, so I'm asking. He took a breath. Elena Whitmore Hale, or just Whitmore if you prefer, would you consider giving us an actual chance? Not to go back to what we were, but to build something new, something honest, something where I actually see you, and you don't have to fight to be heard. Elena studied him. 6 months of watching him show up, of seeing him take tenant meetings seriously, review contracts personally, handle problems instead of delegating them away. 6 months of him respecting her space while staying present. 6 months of genuine effort. It wasn't perfect. He still fell back into old patterns sometimes, still caught himself about to make assumptions or dismiss concerns. But he noticed now, corrected himself, tried to do better. What would that look like, she asked. I don't know exactly, but I know what it wouldn't look like. Me ignoring you, me expecting you to be quiet, me choosing comfort over actually being married to you. Adrian leaned forward. I love you, the real you. The fierce, terrifying, brilliant woman who sees through all my weak excuses and demands I be better. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of standing beside you. Elena felt her breath catch. In 18 months of marriage, he had never said he loved her. Not once. You love me, she repeated. Desperately, completely. In a way that makes me realize I never understood what love was before. His voice cracked. I know I don't deserve another chance. I know I've squandered every right to your trust. But I'm asking anyway because the alternative is spending my life knowing I let you go without ever really fighting for you. Elena stood and walked around the desk. Adrian stayed seated, watching her with something like hope and terror warring in his expression. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. I'm not the woman you married, she said. Thank God for that. I'm loud. I have opinions. I will fight you when I think you're wrong. I'm counting on it. I will never again make myself smaller to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. Good. You shouldn't. Adrian's hands came up to cover hers. I don't want you smaller. I want you exactly as you are, taking up space, demanding better, setting the world on fire when it needs burning. Elena felt tears threatening but didn't let them fall. If we do this, if we try again, it's on my terms. Name them. Equal partnership, real communication, No more secrets or whispered names in the dark. Done. And if you ever treat me like I'm invisible again, you'll leave and I'll deserve it. Adrian's voice was fierce. But I won't. I swear to you, Elena, I won't. She kissed him then. Not the careful, polite kisses of their wedding night, but something raw and honest and real. When she pulled back, Adrian was staring at her like she'd rearranged the stars. Is that a yes? He asked. It's a maybe. Let's try and see what happens. Oh, we'll figure it out as we go. Elena smiled. Think you can handle that kind of uncertainty? With you? Absolutely. He stood, pulling her closer. I'll take whatever you're willing to give and be grateful for it. Good, because I'm not giving you everything at once. You have to earn it. Then I'll spend every day proving I can. A year later, Ashford Hall hosted the first annual estate management conference. Landowners, managers, and tenants from across the country gathered to discuss the reforms Elena had pioneered. Transparency requirements, tenant representation, regular audits, standardized contracts. What had started as a desperate attempt to expose one corrupt steward had become a movement. Elena stood on the platform in Ashford's Great Hall, looking out at hundreds of faces, and felt the weight of their attention. A year ago, she would have frozen, would have made herself quiet and small and tried to disappear. Not anymore. Thank you for coming, she said, her voice carrying through the hall. A year ago, I exposed corruption at this estate because I was tired of watching people suffer in silence. I didn't know it would lead to systemic change. I didn't know others were fighting similar battles. But here we are. Applause rippled through the crowd. The work isn't finished, Elena continued. There are still estates operating under the old system. Still managers who think they can exploit trust without consequences. Still people who believe challenging authority is futile. She paused. But we're proving them wrong. One reform at a time, one estate at a time. One person finding their voice and refusing to be silent. More applause, louder this time. Adrian stood at the back of the hall, watching his wife command the room with the same intensity she brought to everything. Lady Constance appeared beside him. She's magnificent. Yes, she is. You almost lost her. I know. Don't do it again. Constance's voice was sharp. That woman is the best thing that ever happened to this family. Treat her accordingly. I intend to. Adrian glanced at his mother. For the rest of my life. After the conference ended and the guests filtered out, Elena found Adrian waiting for her in the estate office. Successful day? He asked. Exhausting day, but yes. She collapsed into her chair. 3 more estates committed to implementing the reforms. 2 landowners want to hire me as a consultant. Will you do it? Maybe, if it doesn't interfere with Ashford. Elena kicked off her shoes. This is my priority. Our priority, Adrian corrected gently. She smiled. Our priority. He crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. I have something for you. Adrian, just let me. He pulled out a small velvet box. I know we're already married. I know rings and gestures don't change the past. But I wanted to give you something that represented what we're building now. Not the marriage my father arranged, not the performance we both endured, but the partnership we chose. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not the delicate traditional wedding band she'd left on the bedside table that November morning, but something stronger. Gold woven with silver in an intricate pattern, substantial and beautiful. The gold is me. The silver is you, Adrian explained. Separate metals, but stronger together, each maintaining its identity while creating something new. He looked up at her. Will you wear it? Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. It's beautiful. Is that a yes? She held out her hand, letting him slide the ring onto her finger beside the simple band she'd eventually reclaimed. It's a yes. Adrian kissed her palm, then her wrist, then stood and pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home. I love you, he murmured against her hair. I love you too. The words came easier now, felt true in a way they never had before. Even when you're an idiot, especially when I'm an idiot, well, that would be most of the time, so it's convenient. She pulled back to look at him. But you're my idiot, and I wouldn't change that. Even knowing everything you know, everything I put you through? Elena thought about it, really thought about it. The pain had been real, The loneliness, the invisibility, the slow erosion of self, all of it had carved wounds that would never fully heal. But those wounds had also forced her to find strength she didn't know she had, to build something entirely her own, to become someone she was actually proud of being. "I wouldn't change me," she said finally, "and you're part of what made me into this. So no, I wouldn't change it." "That's very generous." "It's honest, which is different." Elena cupped his face. "We're building something good, Adrian, something real, but it only works because we both fought for it. Then I'll keep fighting." He kissed her softly, every single day. 2 years after Elena had walked out of Ashford Hall in the pre-dawn darkness, she stood in the same bedroom where it had all started. But everything was different now. The heavy velvet curtains had been replaced with lighter fabric that let in actual sunlight. The oppressive furniture had been swapped for pieces Elena had chosen herself. Her books lined the shelves instead of decorative nonsense she'd never read, and Adrian lay beside her, not as a distant stranger, but as a partner who'd earned his place there. "What are you thinking about?" he asked sleepily. "How strange it is to be back here, in this room." "We can use your cottage if you prefer." "No, I like it here now." Elena turned to face him. "It's not the same room anymore. We made it ours instead of just yours." Adrian pulled her closer. "Everything's ours now." "Not everything. I still have my cottage, which I'm not allowed in without permission." "Exactly." Elena smiled against his shoulder. "Some boundaries are healthy." They lay in comfortable silence as morning light filtered through the windows. Outside, Elena could hear the estate waking up. Stable hands moving horses, gardeners starting their work, the rhythms of a place that finally functioned the way it should. "I'm proud of you," Adrian said suddenly. "For what?" "For everything. For leaving when you needed to. For coming back on your terms. For changing an entire system because you refused to accept that things couldn't be better." He kissed her forehead. "You're remarkable." "We're remarkable," Elena corrected. "You changed too." "Only because you forced me to." "No, you chose to. I can't take credit for your growth." She propped herself up on one elbow. "You could have stayed the same. Hired another manager, gone back to London, learned nothing, but you didn't. Because losing you was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and getting you back, earning you back, was the best." Adrian's expression turned serious. "I know I'll never fully make up for those 18 months, but I'll spend the rest of our lives trying." "I know," Elena kissed him, "and I'll spend the rest of our lives holding you to that promise." "Sounds fair." Later that morning, Elena rode Tempest across Ashford lands, reviewing drainage projects and crop rotations, and the 1,000 small details that made up estate management. Miller met her at the eastern fields, where they were testing new irrigation techniques. "Looking good," she said, examining the system. "Should increase yield by about 15% if the rains cooperate." Miller wiped his hands on his coat. "Speaking of cooperation, the other estates that adopted your reforms, they're reporting similar success. Better tenant relations, more efficient operations, fewer disputes." "Good. That's what we wanted." "It's more than good. It's revolutionary." Miller's voice was warm. "You changed things, Elena. Really changed them. And people know it was you." Elena felt a flush of pride but tamped it down. "It was all of us. It started with you. Own it." She thought about that. About the woman she'd been at 4 a.m. that November morning, broken and invisible and desperate. That woman never could have owned anything. But Elena Whitmore Hale, fierce, unapologetic, undeniable, could own everything she'd built. "All right," she said, smiling. "I'll own it." That evening, the entire household gathered for dinner. Elena and Adrian, Lady Constance, Miller, and several other tenants, her father who'd ridden over from Whitmore House. It wasn't formal. The table was crowded and loud, people talking over each other, laughter echoing off the walls. It was perfect. Halfway through the meal, Lady Constance tapped her glass for attention. "I have an announcement," she said, silencing the room. "I've decided to retire from managing household affairs. Elena will be taking over completely." Elena nearly choked on her wine. "What? You're already running the estate. You might as well run the house too." Constance's smile was sharp. "Besides, I'm tired, and you're better at it than I ever was." I Thank you. Don't thank me. You earned it. Constance raised her glass. To Elena, who saved this family from itself and had the patience not to murder us all in the process. The table erupted in laughter and agreement, glasses raised in toast. Elena caught Adrian's eye across the table. He was grinning at her, pure pride and affection in his expression. She mouthed, "I love you." He mouthed it back. After dinner, Elena and her father walked the grounds together, enjoying the cool evening air. "You're happy," James observed. "I am." Elena sounded surprised by her own certainty. Actually, genuinely happy. "Good. You deserve it." He squeezed her shoulder. "Your mother would be proud. Hell, I'm proud. Thank you for everything, for taking me in when I left, for supporting me, for not telling me to go back and try harder. You're my daughter. I'll always support you, even when you're being terrifying and revolutionary." Elena laughed. "Especially then." They walked in comfortable silence until they reached Rosedale Cottage, Elena's sanctuary, her space apart. "Do you still need this?" her father asked. "The separate residence?" Elena considered. She spent most nights at the main house now, with Adrian, but knowing she had somewhere entirely hers, somewhere she could retreat to if she needed space. "Yes," she said. "I still need it. Maybe I always will." "That's not a failure, you know, needing your own space." "I know. It's just different from what I thought marriage would be." "Most things are." James kissed her forehead. "But you made it into something that works for you. That's all that matters." Later, Elena found Adrian waiting for her in their bedroom, reading by lamplight. He looked up when she entered. "Good walk?" "Very good." She started unpinning her hair. "Your mother announced she's retiring." "I heard. How do you feel about that?" "Terrified, honored, completely unprepared." Elena met his eyes in the mirror. "But I'll figure it out." "You always do." Adrian set down his book and came to help with her hair, gentle fingers working through the pins. "You know what today is?" "Tuesday?" "The 2-year anniversary of the day you left." Elena went still. She hadn't realized, hadn't been tracking it. 2 years, she repeated. 2 years since you walked out of this house because I wasn't worth staying for. 2 years since you reminded me that silence isn't strength and enduring isn't the same as loving. Adrian's hand stilled in her hair. "Best thing that ever happened to me." Elena turned to face him. "Your wife leaving you was the best thing that ever happened to you?" "My wife refusing to settle for less than she deserved was the best thing that ever happened to me." He cupped her face. "You saved yourself. And in doing so, you gave me a chance to save myself too." "That's very poetic." "I'm trying something new. I noticed." Elena pulled him down for a kiss. "Keep trying. I like it." They fell into bed together, not with the desperate intensity of new lovers, but with the comfortable intimacy of partners who knew each other's bodies and hearts. Afterward, Elena lay against Adrian's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "Adrian?" "Hmm?" "Thank you." "For what?" "For becoming someone worth staying for." His arms tightened around her. "Thank you for staying. Even when you're difficult?" "Especially when I'm difficult." Elena smiled in the darkness. "Then I'm not going anywhere." And she meant it. 3 years later, Elena stood in the same great hall where she'd given her first conference speech, but this time the room was decorated for celebration. Ashford's reforms had been adopted by over 50 estates. Tenant complaints had dropped by 70% across participating properties. The systematic corruption that had nearly destroyed families had been rooted out and replaced with accountability. And Elena Whitmore Hale had been named Reformer of the Year by the National Estate Management Society. She accepted the award wearing a dress she'd chosen herself, deep green silk that was elegant but practical, with pockets because she'd insisted on pockets, and spoke to a room full of people who'd come specifically to hear her. "When I started this," she said, "I wasn't trying to change the world. I was just trying to survive it. But somewhere along the way, I learned that surviving isn't enough. That accepting less than you deserve, staying silent when you should speak, making yourself small to avoid conflict, that's not peace. That's slow death." She paused, letting the words settle. "So I stopped surviving and started fighting. For myself first. Then for others who couldn't fight for themselves. And I learned that one person refusing to be silent can change everything. The applause was deafening. Adrian watched from the audience, tears streaming down his face that he didn't bother to hide. Beside him, Lady Constance dabbed at her own eyes with a handkerchief. She's magnificent. Yes, she is. You're lucky to have her. I know, every single day I know. After the ceremony, Elena found Adrian waiting for her outside. Proud of you, he said simply. I'm proud of us. She took his hand. We did this together. You did this. I just finally got out of your way. Elena laughed. That's growth. They walked through the gardens together, Elena still wearing her award medal, Adrian holding her free hand like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. Do you ever think about that morning? He asked. When you left? Sometimes. What do you think about? Elena considered. I think about how terrified I was, how certain I was that leaving meant failing, how I didn't know if I'd ever feel whole again. She squeezed his hand. And I think about how wrong I was. Leaving wasn't failing. It was the first honest thing I'd done in 18 months. Do you regret coming back? No. Because I came back different, stronger, on my own terms. She stopped walking and turned to face him. You're not the man I married, and I'm not the woman you married, and that's the only reason this works. I love who you've become. I love who you're becoming. Elena pulled him closer. Every imperfect, works-in-progress bit of you. They kissed in the garden while the sun set over Ashford lands. Lands that thrived now, managed by people who were valued instead of exploited, governed by systems that prioritized accountability over convenience. Elena had done that, not the silent wife who'd endured neglect, not the broken woman who'd fled in darkness, but the force of nature she'd become when she finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. Later that night, Elena stood at the window of their bedroom, hers and Adrian's, transformed into something that belonged to both of them, and looked out at the estate she'd saved. Adrian came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. What are you thinking? He murmured. Elena leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence, the certainty of his support. I'm thinking about fire, she said. Fire, how it destroys, but also how it purifies. Clears away deadwood so new growth can come. She turned in his arms. We burned down what we were and built something better from the ashes. And you're not sorry? Not even a little bit. Elena kissed him. Are you? Only sorry it took so long, that you had to fight so hard to make me see what was right in front of me. Adrian's voice was rough with emotion. But I see you now, all of you. And I will never stop seeing you. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. They stood together in the window, watching the moon rise over lands that had almost been lost, a marriage that had almost died, a future that had almost never happened. But almost didn't matter anymore. What mattered was now. Was the fierce, imperfect love they'd built through honesty instead of performance. Was the partnership they'd forged through confrontation instead of silence. Was the woman Elena had become when she finally stopped waiting for permission to exist fully. And the man Adrian had become when he finally stopped being afraid of standing beside someone stronger than himself. Together, they'd transformed not just an estate, but an entire system. Together, they'd proven that change was possible. Together, they'd built something worth fighting for. And when the sun rose the next morning, Elena woke in Adrian's arms, smiled, and got to work. Because there was always more work to be done, more voices to amplify, more systems to challenge, more fire to set. And Elena Whitmore Hale, once silent, once invisible, once desperate to be seen, was done being quiet. She was done being anything less than exactly who she was meant to be. Undeniable, uncompromising, unstoppable. A force,